Today we're checking out another Alex Bale theory video called Why Blue's Clues is a Fantasy Inside Law & Order. Law & Order is a pretty old TV show from like the 90s. And how are these two shows connected? Do they have the same actor? Do they have similarities from the show? We're about to find out right now. Oh my, Blue's Clues! Alex!
Hi there.
What
Blue's
are you
Clues
doing
is an
here?
educational children's TV show about a man named Steve who lives in a magical world where he spends his day talking
Steve
to
is
inanimate
low-key on
objects,
drugs.
jumping through picture frames, and trying to find clues to help understand his magical blue dog. Law & Order is a gritty, realistic
I like that show.
that involves New York City homicide detectives trying to solve murders and prosecute criminals. These two shows are very different. You
They
cannot
make
find
no
two
sense.
shows more polar opposite than Blue's Clues and
Facts.
Law & Order. And yet, despite this, not only do I believe that these two shows exist in the same universe, but I'm also going to be proving that the entire Blue's Clues show is actually just a fantasy inside of the mind of a single Law & Order side character.
Is that the
I
same
am being
actor?
Serious. I know that sounds crazy, but just stick with me. Because I'm pretty sure that I have discovered a 29-year-old secret that has never been talked about before today. Get ready, because this is the Blue's Clues Law & Order theory.
No fucking way. That's Law & Order. Oh shit, what the fuck? Hey, look, Blue's Paw. Joe. Joe's not in the show, is he? Josh too? What in the world? Theory by Alex Bale. Yo, this is sick. He got the whole Law & Order intro.
By far, the most common type of fan theory is the dream theory. The idea that everything happening in a story is actually all
Alice
just
in
inside
Wonderland?
of a character's head. Whether they're stuck in a coma, or they're dreaming, or hallucinating, or they're actually dead. Pretty much every piece of media has some kind of dream theory. And it's sort of the lazy, low-hanging fruit of fan theories. You can just apply it to literally anything, and usually there's never actually any evidence besides, "Whoa, this show is so crazy and unrealistic, that must mean it's a dream!"
Ooh.
And surprisingly, the show that seems to have the most of these types of fan theories is Blue's Clues.
Nah, man.
Steve is actually
I thought it was
schizophrenic,
SpongeBob.
Steve is actually in a mental asylum.
Oh, what the
Steve
fuck?
is actually a drug addict.
Oh,
Steve
shit.
is actually in prison. Steve is actually a murderer who killed his parents. Oh my god.
Yo, I
made
remember
a
making
parody
that.
of these theories back in 2017.
So yeah, it's a pretty basic, normal kid show.
Oh shit,
Steve,
old
a
Alex, bro.
30-year-old
What the fuck happened to
Who killed
his
parents,
beard?
pretends to be a kid.
You know, that was before I dedicated my life to
Bro,
making
he
fan
changed
theories
a
about kids' shows.
lot.
And look, I understand the appeal of these types of theories. It's fun to take something innocent from your childhood and give it a dark,
Yeah, but it
edgy
fucks up
plot
a lot
twist.
of things
That's kind
too.
of literally my job right now. But
Yeah, you fucked up
why
my
are there
childhood.
so many of these theories about specifically Blue's Clues? Well, I think it's because everything about this show has always felt fake. Steve
What?
is the only real person in this world. He looks like a young adult,
Yeah,
but
he's
he
not
acts like a
interacting with the
child.
environment
and
like
he lives
that.
alone in a house where he spends his day jumping into picture frames or talking
like-
to unseen voices or inanimate objects. It just kind of sounds like I'm describing someone who is experiencing some kind of false reality.
Some
Even the
mental
way
issue?
Steve moves around is strange. He never actually leaves the room. He just kind of pretends
Like,
to
what
walk
is
in
this,
place
bro?
while this fantasy world moves around him.
Come on.
Yeah, he's not moving.
Obviously, that was more of a filming limitation, but it still adds to this feeling of fakeness. But other than these surface-level weird vibes the show gives off, there's never actually been any strong evidence to prove one of these theories. And believe me, I and others have looked. It has been 28 years since this show first came out. You know, you'd think if there was actually some kind of smoking gun here, we would have found it by now. But what if that's because we've all been looking in the wrong place.
That's when Law and
So,
Order
the other
come
day,
into place.
I stumbled upon an interesting piece of Blue's Clues trivia. A year after Steve Burns filmed the Blue's Clues pilot, he had a small role in an episode of Law and Order. And I thought the idea of seeing Steve from Blue's Clues in a gritty, realistic cop show was kind of funny, so I decided to track down the 1995 episode titled Cruel and Unusual. Just a heads up, this episode deals with some pretty serious subject matter,
Oh, shit.
so please proceed with caution.
That's it. Listen to him. Cruel
In this
and unusual.
episode, Steve Burns plays a kid
What
with
the
autism
fuck?
named Kevin
That's
Jeffries.
Steve!
Good morning, how are you?
Great.
What time is it?
10:15.
No, it's 10:18.
We learn that Kevin has trouble communicating with others and often harms himself. So his parents send him to live in a children's behavioral clinic.
Oh,
Just what was the
fuck?
behavioral clinic doing for him?
When Kevin was 10, he started to hurt himself.
We didn't know what to do. We couldn't keep Kevin here.
No.
We had to send him away.
We later find out that the doctors at this clinic were horribly mistreating him by giving him intense electroshock therapy and forcing him to wear a sensory deprivation helmet
the
for
fuck?
days.
He kept
Why?
Kathy in this helmet.
He's
for
not a
3
lab
straight
rat.
days.
You don't use
This
him for
helmet cut off
experimentation.
the blood supply to our daughter's brain.
The episode starts with
What?
Kevin after he's escaped from the facility, but tragically he gets arrested and later succumbs to the injury sustained.
yo, why
from
are they
his
putting him in a
abuse
cage,
and
man?
Dies.
I don't know, Mike. I think the kid's dead.
And the rest of the episode follows the detectives investigating his death. So yeah, this is a very sad and serious
dark.
episode, and it deals with some real systemic issues that are still a problem today. And like I was saying, this show is clearly very, very different than Blue's Clues.
A lie.
But what I find interesting about this is that for years, people have been trying to prove that Steve is actually in prison or a mental facility, and now we have this piece of media where we see Steve's actor in that exact position, and as far as I'm aware, no one's ever really talked about this. I mean, sure, Kevin's not schizophrenic, he has autism, but seeing as how he was being abused and put into sensory deprivation for days where he couldn't hear or see anything, you can kind of imagine that anyone in that position might try to escape to some kind of fantasy inside of their head. So yeah, I thought this was an interesting coincidence, but at the end of the day, that's kinda all it was. Like, obviously, just because the same actor shows up in 2 different shows doesn't mean they're actually connected. But then, I took a closer look at this episode, and I started to notice more and more weird similarities between Kevin and Steve.
Kevin Jeffries.
At first, it just started with some little things. We are told by Kevin's parents that he was learning to draw.
Thanks to him, Kevin was learning to draw.
And in every episode
Oh!
of Blue's Clues, Steve draws in his handy dandy
What?
notebook.
Our handy dandy notebook. Let's draw a rectangle and there. Cheese.
What the
Okay,
fuck?
but so what? Lots of kids like to draw. But we are also told
Wait, yeah, he's
that
a
when
man,
Kevin
though.
harmed himself, he was strapped to a chair.
We put them in a chair, and then we hold them there using soft cuffs.
And in every episode of Blue's Clues, Steve spends a lot of time in his thinking chair.
No
We're ready to sit
fucking
in our
way, bro.
Now that we're in our thinking chair, let's think.
And
Yo.
then, when Kevin escaped the facility, he kept asking people what time it was.
What time is it?
10:15.
Wait,
What time?
he has a time thing too.
What time?
Now, it is common for some people with autism to rely on specific schedules or routines, but what time it is also really important in
Yeah.
Blue's Clues.
What time is it?
What time is it now?
Steve has a cleanup time,
We just had cleanup time.
a nap time.
It's Blue's nap time.
Now it's time for so long. There's a talking clock.
Oh my God.
And most of all, every day, Steve has mail time.
Yeah, so he really cares about
Mail's here.
being
yeah,
on
there's
schedule.
Some weird similarities here, but nothing actually concrete. I didn't really start to take any of this seriously until I realized. After Kevin escaped, we are told that he went to a movie theater. And guess what he did in the theater.
Movie started at 10. He was out of here by 10 after 10. Got out of his seat, walked into the screen.
Kevin got out of his seat and tried to walk into
What
the
the
screen.
fuck?
Doesn't that sound exactly like Steve Bluska doing Into a Picture?
Yo!
Got out of his seat, walked
What the fuck?
This kind of feels like
Bro!
more than a coincidence. So this is when I first started to consider, is it really possible that Kevin Jeffries from Law & Order
Nah,
is the
bro,
real
that-
Steve, and Blue's Clues is
They're
all
not even
fantasy
trying to hide
created
it.
to escape his abusive reality? Okay, I know you're not convinced yet, and to be honest, neither was I.
I'm kind of convinced.
But don't
I
worry,
can't lie. I can't lie.
we are
I'm convinced.
just getting started. Kevin's behavioral clinic is in New York City, and the one
Dick
time
Wolf.
characters actually leave the Blue's Clues fantasy world and go
what
to
the
the real
fuck?
world, they end up in New York.
Blue's Clues in New York City? This is epic!
Also, in the very first episode of Blue's Clues, we can see a newspaper from the New York Times inside of Steve's house,
Islamic
strongly
party.
implying that's actually where he lives. We can
Yeah.
also see objects from Blue's Clues in Kevin's life. In Kevin's parents' house, we see a very large salt and pepper shaker, just like Mr. Salt and
I mean, that's
Mrs.
pretty
Pepper.
generic.
Mr.
Every
Salt and
house
Mrs.
carries
Pepper.
that. I wouldn't really.
And in the clinic, we can
You know.
see a red bucket, just like Steve's friend, Pale.
Hello, Pale.
Kind of.
Also, when Steve left the show to go to college, he left on a blue bus.
A blue bus.
And when Kevin escaped the clinic, in his pocket he had a schedule for the Greyhound.
Here you go. Amtrak schedule, Greyhound schedule.
I'm
which is
fucking
also
convinced,
a
yo.
blue
I
bus.
can't lie.
Alright, those are some
ca-
more interesting connections, but you're probably still not completely sold yet, right? Well, check this out. When Steve eventually left the show to go to college, he was replaced by his younger brother Joe,
Oh, hi. It's me, Steve's brother Joe.
and later, Joe got replaced by their cousin Josh.
Hi, it's me, Josh.
And not only does Kevin also have a younger brother, but at the clinic, there is a nurse named Joe
What's your name? Joe Garvey. Joe Garvey, you're under arrest for assault.
and an occupational therapist named Josh.
Take a look at the amended
nah,
complaint.
I wouldn't
Occupational
say that's a
therapist Josh
connection.
Bingham was dropped.
I think that Kevin
Maybe
is
he
taking
mixed up the
aspects
names.
from his real life, like the objects or the names of the people working at the clinic,
Yeah.
and applying them to his fantasy. Also, this one is
the
less
fuck?
impressive, but the name Kevin is also the name of the Blues Clues UK host.
Hello out there, it's me,
Oh, what the
Kevin.
fuck? They have a
Also-
UK
also,
host?
check this out. Kevin's behavioral clinic has the same initials as Blues Clues. Huh? That one's also not that impressive, I know. But wait,
Yeah.
if this theory is true and all of this is just inside of Kevin's head, then why does the main character of his fantasy keep changing?
Hi. Come on in.
Hi, come
Maybe
on
it's
in.
different
Hi,
kids or
come on
something?
in.
Well, at first, I thought maybe Joe and Josh could actually just be from two different kids who took Kevin's spot in the clinic after he died. But the clinic gets shut down at the end of the episode,
You made them close the clinic.
so they would all have to be from Kevin. But why? Well, we're told that Kevin has tried to escape from the clinic before.
Well, we called the police this morning as soon as the clinic told us that Kevin ran away. He's done this before.
So, what if every time a host leaves Blue's Clues,
They replace him.
it's actually Kevin trying to escape the clinic, and when he's inevitably put back inside,
He's done this before.
his fantasy resets with a new Blue's Clues host.
As if he died or
Come on in.
something.
Hi, come on in. Hi, come on in.
As if he
Okay,
got
so
reincarnated.
there is a surprising amount of connections here. You can't deny that. But it still kind of feels like we're missing something. Like, I can see why Kevin would imagine a fun, colorful world to escape his abuse, but why is Kevin's fantasy so focused on playing a scavenger hunt game with a blue dog? As far as I can tell, there's nothing similar to that in this episode. Well, I think to answer this, we need to take a closer look at what Blue's Clues actually is. At At the beginning of the Law & Order episode, Kevin's doctor explained to the detectives why Kevin harmed himself.
It's pretty common with some autistic children.
We are gonna play Blue's
At the
Clues.
beginning of the Law & Order episode, Kevin's doctor explained to the detectives why Kevin harmed himself.
It's pretty common with some autistic children. It's frustration because of their inability to communicate.
It's frustration because of his inability to communicate. Now, autism is a spectrum, and it's a lot more complicated and nuanced than the way TV shows like this tend to portray it. But it is
You
true
can have
that some
like a
people with
percentage of
have
autism.
varying levels of difficulty communicating. And I think this becomes interesting when we take a look at what Blue's Clues
He can still
is.
talk and
What
function
story should we tell?
normally. So obviously he's low on the
You guys
spectrum.
do? We'll play Blue's Clues to figure out what story Blue wants us to tell.
It's a game where you try to understand Blue, a character who has an inability to communicate. This is literally the entire
What the
premise
fuck?
of the show. So I think that this is telling us that Blue represents the side of Kevin who struggles to communicate with others. Okay, but where did the idea for a blue dog come from? Like I said, I couldn't find any references to dogs in this episode. The closest visual was this vaguely blue drawing in Kevin's room that I
it can't be.
really
It
make
can't be
out,
Blue.
or this teddy bear that kind of had a similar pattern to Blue.
Nah,
but
nah.
nothing really concrete, which is weird because Blue is such a major part of this fantasy. But then I realized it doesn't matter if we can't find a direct connection, because in Blue's Clues, Steve didn't actually adopt Blue. In a flashback episode of Blue's Clues, we learned that when Steve was younger, he read a book about a blue dog.
It's a book about a puppy.
Which caused Blue to magically come to life.
So it's his imagination of the dog.
And I think this is also probably
He
what
needed an
happened
emotional
with Kevin.
support dog.
We see that the Children's Behavioral Clinic is full of what we can reasonably assume are
Toys.
children's books. Maybe there's a book in here that also gave Kevin the idea for a blue dog, just like Steve. In fact, this idea of a children's book giving Kevin ideas for his fantasy is exactly what we see at the start of the Blue's Clues.
Yeah, whoa! Yo, this is crazy.
Hi, it's me, Steve.
Every single episode of Blue's Clues starts with a stack of children's books in the real world, before going inside of a book called Blue's Clues where the episode takes place. The show literally tells us every episode that Steve's world is fake and comes from a book. And I think this real world full of children's books is actually the Law & Order Behavioral Clinic. And if this is true, that also means that there's probably a book literally called Blue's Clues in the clinic that Kevin is basing his fantasy off of.
That could be so
even
true.
if we never see a blue dog or even hear the name Steve in this Law & Order episode, Kevin still could have gotten all of those ideas from an existing Blue's Clues book in the clinic. Now, the only thing that doesn't really fit with this idea is mail time.
Hello, mailbox.
Hi, Steve. Have I got a letter for you?
Sure, maybe
Maybe it's a letter saying he
mailbox
can
was
come
just
back home or
something in the
something.
book. But there's no way Steve watching videos of kids in the real world would be something in a children's book.
Look, it's a letter from our friends.
Hi, Steve. This is where we play with our blocks. This goes that way.
A facility.
So what are these videos? Well, the behavioral clinic is full of other children.
You want to see what a good day is for some of these kids?
So I think these videos are Kevin's perception of the other kids. There is just an undeniable amount of connections and similarities between this episode and this show. It just really feels like Blue's Clues is all a fantasy inside of Kevin Jeffries' head. But at this point, you're probably wondering, could any of this actually be intentional?
Is any of this even real?
If this theory is true, does that mean that the entire plot of Blue's Clues was actually secretly based on this one random episode of Law & Order? I'll admit, that seems unlikely, especially since this episode came out a
Before.
year after the Blue's Clues pilot was filmed.
Actually, it could be possible.
It's a lot more likely that if this was intentional, then it was probably just the Law & Order creators deciding to secretly connect these two shows on their own. Maybe just because they thought it would be funny, I don't know. Or maybe it's some weird mixture of both, because even years after this episode came out, Blue's Clues does still seem to weirdly line up with it. I honestly don't know. And to be fair, this could all still just be a bunch of weird coincidences and that's it. But regardless of the creator's intent, it still works, you know? And it makes talking about Blue's Clues a lot more interesting. And at the end of the day, I think that's kind of the point of all of these edgy Blue's Clues fan theories. And this was originally where I planned on ending this video. But there was still one lingering question that was bothering me. If Blue's Clues really is just inside of Kevin Jeffries' head, then what about when Kevin died at the beginning of the episode?
What
I mean,
the
I guess
fuck?
we could just say that the entire Blue's Clues timeline takes place before Kevin's death, and if the show ever gets canceled, then we can just say that that is when Kevin died and the fantasy ended. But what if I told you we've already seen Kevin's death inside of Blue's Clues? So, I recently watched the new Blue's Clues movie from 2022 called Blue's Big City Adventure. And not only did I find even more similarities between this movie and the show, but I believe that this movie is showing us the day that Kevin died and the true end.
No
of the Blue's
fucking
Clues
way.
timeline. So, this movie is about Josh, the newest host of Blue's Clues, going on a big adventure to audition for a Broadway musical in New York City.
Blue, we are definitely not in storybook world anymore.
It's kind of what you'd expect out of a modern-day Blue's Clues movie. He goes on a journey to the real world and gets lost. There's lots of wacky hijinks, but in the end, he finds his way and gets the part.
We want you to be the star of our Broadway show.
Yes, of course. Yes.
But if you watch this movie with this theory in mind, so many things take on a whole new meaning. The first thing that immediately caught me off guard was the opening song.
It's a brand new day.
This song is about starting the day, and Josh
A brand new
keeps saying,
day.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Blue.
And literally, the first thing we hear Kevin Jeffries say is good morning.
So is Donovan.
Good morning, how are you?
Despite it clearly being night, we also hear this line in Josh's song.
This life is just like a beautiful dream.
This life is just like a
No way
beautiful
he said it
dream.
here.
Interesting. And while Josh sings, the other characters keep telling him to wake up.
Wake up. Wake up.
It's a brand new day.
Right away, this movie feels different, like it's trying to draw attention to the fact that this world is just Kevin's fantasy and it's time for him to leave it. Josh leaves his fantasy world to go to the audition in New York, just like how Kevin escapes the clinic at the start of the episode. And just like Kevin, Josh immediately seems very disoriented by the outside world.
Yeah, because it's his first time in it.
Until, of course, his fantasy starts to take over to protect him from reality.
He's escaping.
But what's interesting about this movie is that for the very first time ever, we get these little glimpses of Blue's Clues from other people's perspectives.
Don't you think so, Madam Mustard? Oh. Lovely to meet you.
Whoa! Mr. Schultz! Mrs. Pepper! Am I glad to see you? Oh my God!
Like I said, this movie feels different. We learn that Josh's audition is at 3 o'clock, and the whole movie is just him trying to find the audition before time runs out.
It's almost time for my audition. Oh my gosh! We don't have much time, Blue.
Could this be why Kevin kept asking people what
The
time it
time.
was?
What time is it? What time? What time?
Josh also doesn't know where his audition is. All he knows is that it's in a theater somewhere.
Excuse me, Do you know the address to the theater?
Which theater?
I don't know which theater.
Maybe this is why Kevin
Yeah, why
went
doesn't
to
he
the
know?
movie theater after he escaped, because he thought it was his Broadway audition. Now, in the Law & Order episode, shortly after leaving the
That's
theater,
why he jumped
Kevin
into the
gets
screen.
arrested and then tragically dies in police custody. But that's not what happens in this movie. Josh goes to the theater and gets the part.
We want you to be the star.
That's probably his imagination.
But instead of him leaving and dying like Kevin, we immediately cut to him performing the musical in a big climactic finale.
My dream is a reality.
My dream is a reality.
If this movie really is Kevin's final escape, then what if this is what Kevin experiences as he dies?
Like, that's his final dream before dying.
And I can feel my world changing.
A massive final magical song where he's surrounded by all of the friends from his fantasy, the only people who ever really understood him. Even the old hosts show up for this final send-off for Kevin.
And thank you for making this a day and an adventure that I will never forget.
I'll never forget how you helped me find all those clues. Thanks again for all your help.
No, really. Now it's over. So long.
And that is sadly where Kevin Jeffries' story ends.
What
now,
the fuck?
I
That's
know
sad,
this
that's
final
sad.
movie theory maybe doesn't have as much evidence as the rest of my theory, but regardless, I like thinking that maybe Kevin found some peace in his final moments. And yeah, I know that this movie came out 27 years after the Law & Order episode, so it's probably a stretch to say that they're still connected. Wait, is that fucking B.D. Wong?
I'm the director of Rainbow Puppy's Broadway musical.
B.D. Wong from Law & Order SVU is the fucking director of Josh's musical?
I'm not entirely comfortable labeling the suspect
What
a
the
serial killer.
fuck?
We want you to be the star of our Broadway show.
Holy shit!
We just figured out Blue's Clues. We just figured out Blue's Clues. We just figured out Blue's Clues.
Because this is my job. This is actually my job. Alright,
Damn.
that is my theory. Thank you so much for watching. Hope I didn't ruin Blue's Clues for you. Hey.
You sure did, pal. You sure did ruin Blue's Clues for me. I don't know what to do now. I cannot watch Blue's Clues. Every time I'm gonna watch Blue's Clues, I'm gonna think about that scene where Steve was just like this on the ground, like about to die. That is crazy, man. This theory is fucking amazing, man. Alex, you did a great job. You crushed it. I'm gonna give this a 8 out of 10. Let me know what your thoughts are. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, and I'm signing out.